Welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vredos. I'm a sociologist who's taught at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and Yeshiva University here in New York City. Harm reduction is a set of ideas, an intervention that tries to reduce the harms associated with both drug use and ineffective racialized drug policies. It's a public health approach in stark contrast to the punitive, judgmental, coercive, moralistic paradigm that has dominated American public policy and thinking for decades. It advocates meeting people where they are, on their own terms, and bringing them into community of caring in order to promote optimal health and social inclusion. This approach advocates support for sterile syringe access programs, overdose prevention centers, drug checking programs to spot fentanyl overuse and possible drug abuse, evidence-based research and science. Some ways of using drugs are clearly safer than others. It's also a movement for social justice, built on a belief in and respect for the rights of people who use drugs. We are really honored and excited to have as our guest on the Radical Imagination for the first time today, one of the most articulate, creative, and committed voices in the field, an activist who's making an enormous difference in shifting the addiction paradigm to one of public safety. Yarelix Estrada is a first-generation Central American drug policy and harm reduction researcher, community outreach worker for overdose prevention, and a psychedelic community organizer. She currently works as a city research scientist with the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene and is on the board of Salud, supporting and advancing Latino Unidos and the Latino Employed Resource Group, where she is working to highlight the needs of Latino health in New York City. Yarelix received her bachelor's degree and master's of science in public health and health policy at Johns Hopkins University and Johns Hopkins University and School of Public Health, respectively. She brings a transformative political and energetic consciousness to historically oppressed communities by working to understand the intersectionality between health policy, race, and class that can make the difference between a psychedelic drama and dream and a paranoid police state nightmare. So, Yarelix, it's wonderful to have you on, and thank you. You're a real trooper here. You're just literally, minutes from the dentist's office.
Yes.
Where you went through a procedure.
My face is still asleep. So sorry.
Oh, well, listen, we'll keep everybody awake here. Don't worry about that. Because this topic is so interesting. It's on the front line of so many things that are happening in the country, in the city here. And you're really on the cutting edge of some really incredible efforts and organizing. And I'm just so pleased and grateful that you're on the Radical Imagination today.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
It is. So listen, I just what I just read about your resume was just the tip of the iceberg. You've been involved for a number of years on a lot of different agencies and organizations and so on. Just get us started here. How did you become interested in this field?
Yeah.
What about your background?
Yeah. I guess it began concurrently. I started using drugs like in college. I started using a lot of psychedelics initially for recreational purposes. And then over time I started noticing that my use, my journeys, whatever, with mushrooms and with psychedelics, like LSD, etc., were actually helping my mental health in ways that I hadn't received care for in the past. So like, I tried to go to therapy. It didn't work out for many reasons. And through those experiences that I had, I got really interested in just drugs in general, but mainly psychedelics. So when I was in college, since I went to Johns Hopkins, I tried to work at the psychedelic research lab. I applied to work there. But that lab was full. So they referred me to a lab across the hall, which ended up being an opiate research lab. And I think knowing that substances like psychedelics tend to expand the mind and also make you very receptive to your environment and the things you're being exposed to, I just felt really interconnected. And a lot of the work that I was doing in that lab, just basically doing harm reduction before I knew what harm reduction was, connecting with folks that had substance use disorders, people that were living in Baltimore City, that were living in poverty, oftentimes had like, issues with intergenerational trauma and a lot of racial trauma because of the ways that the policies kept people poor and made it difficult to access housing and health services.
Right.
Yeah, I think that really kicked off just a love for harm reduction and drugs like across the spectrum.
Right. Wow. There's a lot to unpack there, and just to be fully transparent, as my audience, followers of the show know, I'm part of the '60s generation, and I want you to know too that I was at Haight-Ashbury Summer of Love I think it was 1967 or so. And I went to the University of Colorado in Boulder, which was sort of, as you probably know, sort of a haven for all kinds of drug experimentation and use and so on. So this is not new stuff, but it's so interesting that this has become now a way so many people are talking about the benefits of the use of psychedelics, as you brought out too. So what have you been finding out in terms of the medical world now, maybe catching up on some of the benefits that, and still the dangers there's still dangers involved too, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so where are we moving toward now? You think specifically at this point with psychedelics?
I mean, at this point, the field has exploded, right? Like there's so many different avenues that
Right.
the space has taken. And I guess separate from my harm reduction work, like, that it eventually led me to doing street outreach and syringe service work and things like that. I also started the Baltimore Psychedelic Society when I lived there. I co-founded it with my friend Mike Margulies. And this was a place where people could I was having a really hard time integrating my experiences. I had taken psychedelics and had these like mind expanding experiences, felt that I had received a lot of healing, but also had a lot of really difficult trauma that had come out that I didn't know what to do with, and was having a really hard time like coming back and working and being just a regular like member of society.
Right.
And I couldn't afford therapy. I couldn't afford psychedelic therapy. I didn't have any friends that did psychedelics, so I didn't know what to do. So I started community organizing, and I created this group where people could get together and like be in community, talk about their experiences, talk about what has helped them, be supportive, etc. I also continue to do that in New York City. I organize a New York City Psychedelic Society. So I've been involved more so on the community side of things, in that I still organize psychedelic integration circles right now, primarily for people of color. And the New York City Psychedelic Society also has a psychedelic integration circle for trans and non-binary folks. It's a lot of people who like don't have access to therapy. They don't have the money to pay for psychedelic therapy. So we're kind of just like taking psychedelics on our own, taking psychedelics with our friends, with our partners, etc., and coming back in community and figuring out how to make sense of it, how to like heal ourselves, because we can't rely on the larger system to do that. And so I think with medicalization and with the industrialization of psychedelics, it's interesting because when I think about the communities that I work with, which tend to be like low income, unhoused, people who use drugs, undocumented people, people that have been historically oppressed for a number of reasons, the medical system is harmful. It's extremely harmful. It's inaccessible. The medical system or the medical care that is accessible tends to be really punitive and harmful in a lot of ways. And I'm from Miami, like I'm from Florida. And so there's like, we're thinking about policies where like undocumented people could get a fine just for showing up to the hospital. So people are like avoiding going to the hospital for care when they have like really acute needs, you know, and just thinking about how inequitable and broken our healthcare system is and our mental health care system is, it just feels really, I don't know, it like short-sighted to be excited about the medicalization of psychedelics, given that we haven't even addressed the basics of what is wrong with our system.
Right. So you're dealing with it at a lot of different levels. I should just add too that I during my undergraduate years, I was some sort of guide, I guess you would call it, for people who were on had taken acid and so on. And most of the time it was okay, but there were certainly bad trips that people had. So it's something, whatever you put in your body is something that people have to understand has consequences, and we at least need to know what's in there, what's going on. So that's an interesting parallel that you're making here in terms of the use of psychedelics and other drugs and the oppressiveness of still the medical system and the use of the law enforcement system, of course, to regulate and check and punish people, particularly people powerless and poor people. So you gravitated toward that as well. So I know as a resident of New York City, we are, many of us are aware of people walking around and obviously in need of some sort of community shelter or interaction and so on. How does the harm reduction idea and programs and organizing you're involved in address some of those issues?
Yeah. So I guess just to lay like the framework of how harm reduction works in New York City, I think we are particularly lucky to be in a city that has a lot of resources and that actually values harm reduction, because there's a lot of places across the country where different harm reduction measures are still illegal, you know. So like, for example, in New York City, we have 14 different syringe service programs where there are like, you know, brick and mortar sites. One of them is mobile, but most of them are brick and mortar sites where people can go and they can get supplies like clean syringes or unused syringes. People can get naloxone, the overdose reversal medication. People can get test strips, like fentanyl test strips. And in a lot of these places, they also have like case management. They sometimes have drop-in spaces where people can go and access just a place to like sit down and hang out and watch TV and drink coffee and be with other people. And, you know, a variety of services depending on which program you're talking about. So that's one of the things that we have. And I think, well, I'll just lay it at that, and I'll speak specifically about the work that I do. So I work at the health department. I'm here on my own. I'm not representing the health department right now. I'm just representing myself. But I run the drug checking program for the city. So we have 5 different sites across New York City where people can bring their drugs and we can test them. And the only requirement is that the drugs have to be powders or pills. We can also test GHB and GBL, but we can't test like weed. We can't test mushrooms, things like that. That would require a different machine. And for me, that's like, it's a place where we've been intentional about making it so that anyone who uses drugs can come and receive care, right? So like people can come, they can tell me what their story is, if there's any backstory to what they've experienced, if they've taken it already, et cetera. And then we can test it, know exactly what's in it, and then we can tell them what's in it without any judgment, right? So like if somebody brings me dope that has fentanyl or xylazine, or somebody brings me MDMA or, you know, just a benzodiazepine that they want to verify that is real, or et cetera, like it doesn't matter what it is, like it's a space for them to come get information, and then we try to tell them how to use that substance as safely as possible. One of the sites that I work at is within the overdose prevention center that we have in New York City. We actually are this New York City is the only place in the U.S. that has 2 sanctioned overdose prevention centers in the city, in the state, in the country, where people can go and they can use drugs under a supervised setting, so that if they have an overdose or if they have a bad reaction in the overdose prevention center, somebody can revive them, someone can take care of them, and part of the services that we offer in the overdose prevention centers in both of them is drug checking services. And so I think harm reduction is just a place for people that are over policed, where they're, stigmatized, badly treated badly in the street and public spaces, can go and feel safe. And not only feel safe, but be taken care of when they're, using drugs. I think it's a lot of harm reduction is just a demonstration of love for people that often are not given that.
Yeah. Was there initial pushback from some of the community members that they didn't want it in their neighborhood, but what, you gained their trust and confidence and so on, but that form of pushback is largely gone at this point, is that right? So the community welcomes the services.
Harm reduction services in general?
Yeah, or the drop-in centers, and so you have one in Harlem and so on. I knew that. I thought initially there was some real pushback by some of the community members. This is just going to bring more people to our community and cause trouble and so on. But that hasn't been the case, correct?
No, yeah, and I also don't want to speak for either of the overdose prevention centers. Again, I'm representing myself, not representing them.
Got it.
But yeah, there was some pushback. It's complicated,
Yes.
the neighborhoods that have a lot of services have a lot of people that need those services. However, that makes certain neighborhoods appear a certain way, and that can cause property values to decrease. And so, there's like an entire economic issue that is really unfortunate because a lot of people need the services that are being offered. I think something that has really helped people with that sometimes have like countering views to the overdose prevention centers and to harm reduction services in general is to allow them to come into the space and see them for themselves. Because I think sometimes this like mysterious thing that they don't understand is happening behind closed doors, or people are doing illegal activity, can seem so ominous. But then when you go in,
dens or crack dens, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like, in your head, you can create this really scary image of what it is. But when you go in and you just see people that are like, just really need a lot of help and finally receiving it and feeling comfortable and, just existing, I think it is hard to tell someone that they don't deserve to be alive, because that's essentially, by closing overdose prevention centers or by opposing them, it's telling people that they don't deserve to be alive in a time where they are probably at their most painful place in their life, and why they need that kind of support.
Absolutely. And it should be mentioned here right off the top here that this is the use of drugs is across the board. We're cutting across race and class. And I mean, if we want to get into the music industry, Wall Street, I mean, we're talking about financial arenas and so on. Huge numbers of professional, upper middle class people use it. Of course, they have the resources to get the help that they perhaps might need. And agree with that statement?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it's one of the things that I think has been really interesting, fun. I don't know what to say, is like, since we started doing drug checking at the Overdose Prevention Center, I think people assume that everyone who comes to check their drugs is going to be like, an unhoused person, someone in chaotic use, and like this kind of, like oftentimes stigmatizing profile that people might assign to folks who use drugs. But I have like wealthy white consultants that use cocaine that come by.
Yeah.
I have young college students from Columbia that come by. I have like nerdy psychonauts that just like want to see the machine and like want to see, what's in their drugs. And I have like people from nightlife. And I also have people who are low income, who are using chaotically. And then the more kind of like not typical drug user, where I have like an old grandma who, you know, you look at her and you don't have any preconceived notions of her, and she's like, I saw you on TV, I want to check my drugs. I'm like, yeah. So yeah, like drug checking is, I think what's really awesome about it is that, you know, it is a non-judgmental space where we provide care and support. And like, I do drugs, you know what I mean? I'm a drug user. And I think that like communicating that to people to show that like, I'm someone who has a career, I have a home, like I have a family, I have connections, I still use drugs and I'm fine, you know? And having that connection with other people who use drugs and like making them feel safe in their process, where whatever process that might be, really cuts across, like you said, like race, class, ethnicity, sexual orientation, like housing status, like all of these things, which has been cool to witness.
Absolutely. It's really important to break down the barriers and just so, you know, the wherever people get their drugs, they are concerned with, I guess the terminology is how it's been stepped on. I mean, what the hell is in it? And that's what's caused most of the problem, correct? And tell us a little about this machine that you tested drugs for. Is it up to speed here in that sense? No pun intended there, but I mean, does it do what it's supposed to do, and so on?
Yeah, I can talk a bit about the machine. So the machine that we use at our drug checking program is called the Fourier Transform Infrared Spectrometer. It's like a tiny portable machine, and it attaches to a laptop. And we only need like half a grain of rice of a sample to put on the machine, and it uses infrared light to be able to shoot a light through it and get a readout of what it is, and then we are able to do the analysis on the laptop. It's not super easy.
And people get the information right away. Yes, they're not waiting days. So within an hour or something. Or?
No, so the person brings you it's like a process, right? It depends on like if the more complicated process that might happen is if the person brings me a pill, or if they bring me like cocaine rocks, for example. Then I have to do some sample preparation. I have to get the rock, I have to crush it up, I have to make it, you know, soft, and then put it on the machine. Or if it's a pill, I have to cut it in half and scrape it. So like that takes a couple minutes. Okay. And then I put the drug on the machine, and then, you know, prepare the machine to do the analysis. And I can get the analysis results within about 2 minutes. But then the actual analysis itself, so like, that's what I was going to allude to, that the machine is great, but the machine doesn't really provide us the answer. It just gives us the tool to do the analysis for. So the drug checking is only as good as your technician. So we've had to go through a lot of training and a lot of practice in order to get to a place where we can make accurate analysis and actually tell someone what's in their drugs. Some drugs are easier to do analysis for. So like, things that are supposed to be one thing, so cocaine, MDMA, ketamine, methamphetamine, things like that, it's a pretty straightforward process. But when we're dealing with drugs that are more of cocktail drugs, so for example, you know, dope, you know, like the heroin supply nowadays has anywhere between 2 to 7 things in it. And some of those things that are present in really small quantities could actually be really potentially harmful for people who don't know that it's there or don't have a tolerance for it. And also other cocktails like Dusi, like a mix of MDMA, ketamine, and other things. That's where a bit more skill is required. So the machine itself has a 5% detection limit, meaning that anything that's present in under 5%, it may not pick it up reliably. But for that reason, we use things like fentanyl test strips, benzodiazepine test strips, and we now have xylazine test strips as well. So yeah, the machine works well within the limits of detection. But it's really not the machine that makes the drug checking service work well. It's the person, the technician that's using the machine, interpreting the results, making sure that the results are accurate, because you can read it and get super inaccurate results and then put someone in danger. And then also how well you communicate those results to the participant, because if you're naming like 4 different substances and the participant doesn't know what they are, or the person who's accessing the service doesn't know what they are, then like the service isn't really that useful if you can't provide more information.
You've got to educate and so on. And you actually, a couple of things right here now. So you actually are in contact with or get information from the drug suppliers. And how does that work in terms of communication? Are they telling you that they've got issues with what they're trying to distribute and so on? And would much of this be, let's use the word rectified or made better if we had a system of greater legalization of these drugs?
Yeah. So I'm hesitant to speak about certain things because there's certain things that we try not
Understood.
to.
Understood.
You know, I'm happy to talk about them on my personally, but because this is a show in the city, anyone can access the service.
Right. And again, where does one get in touch with this?
Yeah, so people can reach out to me at drugchecking@health.nyc.gov if they have any questions. We also have a page on drug checking on our New York City Department of Health website. But what I will say, and again, this is me saying it, is anyone can access the service. I think drug checking services are extremely impactful when they're given to people who use drugs themselves, because it gives us the opportunity to give them real-time counseling. And it's like going to therapy. You know what I mean? Like, it builds on itself over time because the drug supply is constantly changing. We're not in the days anymore where I can go to my dealer, buy something, and expect for it to be the same next week. It's not like that anymore. It changes every 2 weeks.
Right.
And so for that reason, people come back. But I think the other way that drug checking is extremely impactful is when people who sell drugs access drug checking. Because when they come in for drug checking, we don't have safe supply right now, right? And like, it would be wonderful if we had a world where we could legalize and regulate drugs. And hopefully with the data that we're collecting with drug checking, we can get to a place where we are able to have those conversations and are able to have a safe supply where people don't have to be accessing, a very volatile supply that's not only volatile because of the adulterants that are present or what people consider to be adulterants, because a lot of people are seeking certain things that other people would consider to be adulterants, but also in terms of purity, in terms of strength, so safe supply would be wonderful. But in until that happens, I think having people who sell drugs access drug checking is awesome, because a lot of the times the people who are coming in to check their drugs who sell drugs, they want to get more bang for their buck, obviously, because they're buying it from somewhere as well. But oftentimes they just want to keep their community safe. So if they come in and they see something that is not supposed to be in there, something that they don't like, now they have the ability to go and shop around for a new supplier, or they have the ability to try to advocate for their supply for it to be what it's supposed to be. And until we have safe supply, if we have people who sell drugs that are checking their drugs and making sure that it's the best possible thing that it can be, or at least letting people know, like, hey, this is dope. I tested it and it has a lot of fentanyl, so be careful. That's more information than someone who thinks it's just heroin and then ends up using a large amount and then has an overdose and dies.
I'm so glad you used that term, to keep the community safer. This is about public safety. And again, as I said in my opening, you're changing the paradigm, the narrative here. This is what makes our community safer, right? We're not talking about punishment and isolation and heavy-handed. We're not in Miami here, right? This is what we need. Is what although I'm sure you've had there's enormous political fights among the mayor, politicians, and so on, as to what approach and how to brand all of this politically, because I know that there's a large segment of the population out there saying, what the hell is this? We people shouldn't be using drugs, period. What do you say to that sort of moralistic argument? Well, they're made this choice, and it's a sign of weakness, and whatever you want to call it. I mean, there's a whole segment of the population, hypocritical as it may be, as they, down their six-pack or whatever. Right. But I don't want to, I'm not generalizing here, stereotyping, but we have such a mixed message given out in this country about drugs and about its use and titillation, and not enough of this, quite frankly, the sort of discussion we're having, and the hard-based scientific empirical evidence that you and certainly, to be transparent, met you at Carl Hart's graduate seminar course this past semester at Columbia, where he is doing the sort of research that is hopefully going to lead to a more rational, you know, approach to all of this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what question I was asking there, but no, the pushback that you must be facing too, from all kinds of elements, particularly those who are saying, you know, what the hell? We're law-abiding citizens. We don't use this stuff, and why are we helping these people, supporting them? We need to get tough and so on, and stop this sort of lifestyle, if you will.
Yeah.
How do you answer those people?
Yeah, I think it depends. I Part of my job before I started doing drug checking was doing street outreach in areas that have high levels of overdose and having these conversations with whoever I could find who was in a business that had issues with overdose. So I'd go around to bodegas, I'd go to laundromats, I'd go to, hair salons, like et cetera, and have these conversations every day. Um, and as you can imagine, there's varying levels of receptivity. So some people are super receptive, they totally get it. I don't have to go too deep into it.
Right.
Other people, there's two types of kind of responses that I get. One is like a very moralistic, cold, detached response, kind of like what I think you're talking about. And the other is it's similar, but there's like an undertone of hurt or pain in that. And I've come to recognize that those people are people who've lost someone to overdose or who have lost someone to drug use in some way.
Yeah.
And so sometimes the conversations are different depending on what, how I feel that person is coming off. For people that don't have experience with drug use or with people in their lives that have used drugs or have experienced an overdose, I think it can be difficult to have that conversation because they really are detached. And that conversation is very different when I realize that like someone has lost someone and they're just dealing with the grief of that loss, or have been impacted by drug use in a way that is painful for them. But I think in general, there's a couple of things that I usually say. Like when I started working in harm reduction, I think it was I forget if the statistic was in 2015 or 2017, but I think it might have been 2015. In 2015, there was over 50,000 people who died of a drug overdose in the United States. And a visual for that is if you were to take a stadium and fill that entire stadium up and then wrap a line around that entire stadium, and all of those people died, that's all the people who died in 1 year in an overdose. And if that was any other condition, sorry?
Yeah. I thought it was 2015 was the date you used, right?
It's either 2015 or 2017, but
Okay.
I think it's 2015.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
And if it was any other condition, if it was any other phenomena happening in the world that wasn't a moral issue, we would do something about it, right? People would be like, oh, wow, we have to go and like, fight whatever it is that's causing this thing. But because it's drug overdose, that is largely a structural issue, but that people don't often recognize it as a structural issue. People are just like, oh, well, those people deserve to die. They got what they had coming for them. But taking that number as a statistic from 2015 or 2016 maybe until now, it's 2023, and we've lost over 100,000 people in 1 year. We've doubled that number in less than a decade. That's just an insurmountable amount of parents, of siblings, of friends, of mentors, of loved ones around the world, around the country, that some of them died because of heartbreak, some of them died because of chronic use, and some of them now are dying because of adulteration. It's people who are using occasionally and are finding things in the supply that they're not able to know that is there, and then having an overdose and dying because there's not someone there, oftentimes with naloxone or for other reasons, to revive them. And so for me, it really comes down to like, we don't want people to die. Like, everyone deserves a right to live. Everyone deserves a right to have a full life. And if you're for the death of others, if you're for 100,000 deaths a year, then I'm not really trying to have a conversation with them. There's not really much that I can say to shift their minds. They need to go live life or something. I don't know what to tell them. But I think from a humanistic perspective, if people are understanding just the gravity of that many people dying, it's kind of hard to want that to continue, because clearly, if in less than a decade we've doubled the amount of deaths from 50,000 to 100,000 in just our country, that means that the treatment system is broken. The things that we have been doing haven't been working. And so we need to be creative. We need to think outside the box. We need to be radical. Like we have to do things like overdose prevention centers and drug checking and supportive services that will keep people alive outside of those, like prohibitionist frameworks and abstinence-based frameworks that haven't been working.
Yeah. You used the term structural in your comment. I wonder if you can flesh that out a bit. And how many people are using your services in any given year at this point? And how many people are still in great need of those services? And what would you like to see expanded in those services that you offer? First, the question about what do you mean, so our audience understands what you're talking about. The issues are structural.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so drug use is, what is it, like 90% of people who use drugs don't have a problem. So just leading with that like, I don't want to make it sound like, oh, we have to pity people who use drugs, because like not everyone has a problem. Like some people just like to do drugs. That's totally fine. Like I just like to do drugs. That's totally fine. But there are some people who, develop substance use disorders, and a lot of that can be because of like adverse childhood events, right? Like people who have trauma for a variety of reasons. Maybe at some point they tried to seek mental health services and were denied. They didn't meet a provider that was similar to them. They couldn't get their insurance to pay for it, etc. And so a lot of people end up turning to drug use to ending up coping with that trauma or coping with that pain. Mm-hmm. Similar to pain, like literal physical pain. There are people who have been through painful experiences, like the typical story that we hear now about the overdose epidemic, where someone, fell off their bike, they broke their collarbone, they went to the doctor, they gave them 30 oxycodone pills a month. They started taking that, they got dependent on it. And then the policies of this country became so restrictive that they no longer could access those drugs. And then they started buying from the street. And then the street supply got volatile. And so that's a structural issue, because for people who are using drugs, there should be supportive services that other countries have, like housing, healthcare, education, maybe universal basic income, things like that are, support networks where people that are in extreme need can be cared for and might be able to even access treatment that is appropriate for them. But the system that we have here is violent. There's overcrowded shelters that nobody wants to go to, that people know if they go to, they might get robbed or they get treated really badly by staff. There's no places to use bathrooms in public spaces. There's treatment places that are extremely expensive, and it's just a rotating door to keep people essentially just like using in many situations, because they're not offering the supportive services that they need, but they're still billing their Medicaid. And so there's all these like structural things that are supposed to be something. There's supposed to be a treatment system to help people use less drugs or stop using drugs. There's supposed to be like ways to find housing, but none of these things are working. They're all broken. And so I think the drug use that is chaotic and the overdoses that we're seeing are just a symptom of the larger, brokenness of our society.
In general, you're including use of alcohol in that 90%. Are you doing that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so prior to coming to New York City, I lived in Baltimore, and I worked on a research study that was seeing the rate of hospital readmissions amongst people who use different substances. And the main substances that we focused on were opiates, cocaine, and alcohol. And actually, the people that had the highest mortality rate amongst all of the folks that we saw were people who drank alcohol, just because of the severity of the condition. Like once they started drinking large amounts, it was kind of near impossible for them to stop. So it's definitely part of the issue.
So the mass media really doesn't get this. So when it talks to us about the opiate crisis, it leaves us with a much different picture than what you're trying to get across to us. I don't see and hear the sort of empathy and the rationality, the love of other people. the necessary transformative changes that are necessary. So how much of this is a media and political, if you will, creation?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a huge media and political creation. I also think it's very moralistic
Yeah.
on behalf
Nancy
of,
Reagan, right? Just say no.
right, yeah,
Mentality.
that, and also like how in this country they've tied like Republicans to evangelicals, and so like, you know, ways of like oppressing people. But that being said, there are a lot of I won't say a lot, but there are several harm reduction organizations that are partnering with like faith groups or like churches that are accepting of people who use drugs and like practice harm reduction. So I don't want to say that that doesn't exist.
Okay.
But yeah, there is this really horrible narrative of stigmatizing people who use drugs. And it just does a ton of harm. Like I've been working in this field for so long that I sometimes struggle with understanding how people can have these perspectives. I think people that don't have empathy are sometimes miserable people that don't have empathy for themselves. And I think it's easy to dehumanize a group of people and to hate them when you don't have somewhere else to displace your anger or your frustrations or, you know, what you're unhappy with in your society or country, and it's just easy to blame a demographic of people. And so I think sometimes people who use drugs are that scapegoat for a lot of people in this country, and it's you know, it's really sad.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, no, that's part of the reason I used Bob Marley's One Love to open up the show. Again, I mean, it's not the panacea, but it's make love, not war. It's not being part of an exploitive, violent structure. It's enjoying life. It can be very joyful and an expanding experience. Um, and that may not mean that you're going to be as productive as the system wants you to be in the way that it's defined. So there is a political angle to that as well. Or I don't know if you want to bring in the issue of capitalism or again maximizing profits and needing to have people, you know, out there in the factories and doing their work and so on, and especially people of color. So make them, you know, make sure that they are following the rules and regulations to keep the machine going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, in the conversation of capitalism, like capitalism is just it's a huge problem in our country. It's like probably driving all these issues, right? Because we don't like socialism and socialist practice is anti-capitalist, right? And that would like just not let the machine work as it should. But I also, you know, like we are a country that overprescribes Adderall, right? Like it like for some time it was like everyone had an Adderall prescription. And it was because I need to do better at school. I need to stay up longer. I need to work harder. I need to, you know, produce. And yeah, now we're having an Adderall shortage, and that's like not good. But you know, it just shows that like the country will oftentimes create ways and to keep the interests of capitalism in line. Um, and I think like for me, a way that I think about myself and also individuals is like in order for us to be happy people, like, well, we all need different things, but we need time, we need space, we need rest, we need healthy food, we need ways to feel fulfillment. And oftentimes we don't have that if we're working nonstop
Yeah.
without any time to rest, without any time for self-reflection, without any time to be with our loved ones.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, so many people get stuck in just like this work mode, not thinking about anything, going numbing out, and then they lose their compassion for other people. So yeah, capitalism is the root of all this, of course.
You know, the remaining few minutes we have, I wonder if I could ask you a couple of maybe somewhat personal questions. What's your family background? Where did you're originally from, or your family is originally from where in Central America? And
Yeah,
what did they bring to your own upbringing here or understanding of all the things you've been talking about?
sure. So I think my parents' story is pretty interesting because like it was the reason why I came to existence is essentially because of the war on drugs. So my dad is from Nicaragua, and he was fighting in the Sandinista Contra war when he was a teenager. They forced him to fight. They gave him a gun and told him to go like kill the Contra soldiers, which are soldiers that were trained by the American, by the U.S. And that war was being fought to, you know, allegedly fight communism, but also to raise funds to, sell cocaine in the U.S. During the war on drugs, and which led to the arrest of like a lot of black families and black leaders. Um, and concurrently, while that was happening, because of the Sandinista Contra war, there was also arms that were being sold through Panama. So my mom's from Panama, and there was this wave of authoritarianism that was happening in the country where they were telling residents of Panama that like if you don't like do what the government wants, if you don't succumb to the government's needs, like you're going to be prosecuted. And my family was like, we don't fuck with that. So like they're kind of like anti-authoritarian. So they were like, all right, we're leaving the country because we're not safe here either. Um, and my mom and my dad met in Miami, and then they had me, got married, and had me. Um, so my mom's a social worker. My dad was raised as a revolutionary, even though he doesn't like talking about that very much anymore. And I think a lot of those aspects of both of them, just even though they tried to kind of suppress those things because they were afraid of what would happen if I was to become a social worker or if I was if I became a revolutionary.
But you are. Look at you. You're a
I
revolutionary.
know they tried their best for me to not, and I did.
In New York, all
Right.
things happen here, right? So here we are. No, I didn't mean to cut you off. So they moved north, and here you are.
Yep. So yeah, I think like the both of them just have an ethos of selflessness, of helping people, of family, of love for others, and just caring for those that don't have, and they've practiced that in different ways in their lives. And a lot of my political ideology stems from that, and has expanded with how the times have changed and how political ideologies continue to expand.
And they live in New York, or do
They
they?
live in Miami.
They live in Miami. Okay, but they come visit, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, listen, we only have a couple more minutes to go, but again, I want to make sure everybody knows how to reach you. But I told you I was going to ask you this because, I asked you what sort of music you're listening to and so on. And Hate Breed, Depression Sonora, please explain, because again, I'm back in the 60s here, and Purple Haze and
Right.
psychedelic, the Temptations and so. But what is this music about? Is this and why do you relate to it? What does it speak to you about?
Yeah. So I when young people grow up in different like communities of music or whatever. When I was in Miami, I was in the hardcore scene, and it was just like a bunch of really angry teenagers that like hated everything, and would go to a lot of hardcore shows to go into mosh pits and fight people. And like that was my therapy and my like like way of releasing anger, that I didn't have outside of that space. And I never grew out of it. Like I love hardcore music, I love deathcore, I love death metal, like that I listen to
That's
a lot
cool.
of that.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah. But yeah, like some of my favorite bands are like Hate Breed or the Acacia Strain. And I still go to shows frequently. I still go to pits, and I still fight people, not as much as I used to because I'm an adult and I have to take care of my body now. But
And you're a weightlifter too, right?
I am a weightlifter, yes.
So that fits into going to the shows in case you
Getting strong so that someone, people can't. Yeah.
watch down. Well, I promise I will take a listen. Hate Breed, and I will try to educate myself. I looked a little bit. I need to do a little more listening and so on. But listen, this has been just fabulous and so important dialogue. One more time in the few seconds we have, I know people that want to reach you and reach the organizations and so on that you've been involved in, and so what's the best way to get in touch with you and these organizations?
Yeah. I guess for drug checking, again, like I can put it in the chat.
Okay.
But for general drug checking information, they can go to drugchecking at health.nyc.gov. If somebody wants to reach me on Instagram, my handle is at my first name, Yarelix, Yarelix 15. The group I organize is a New York City Psychedelic Society.
Mhm.
That email is nicodelic@gmail.com. And I mean, I'm kind of hesitant to offer my personal email, but like, I don't know if that.
Well, whatever I'm sure this is enough to get hold
Okay.
of you and so on. And you're going to also try to get Mayor Adams to come to one of these hardcore.
Oh, wow.
No, he likes to party a lot, I hear.
He does.
All right, so why
That
not?
would be something.
Well, we break down the barriers anyway.
Right.
Listen, the best of luck to you. I'm so happy we've met. You've done this show. We'll have you on again.
When my face
Really,
is
thank
not
you.
half asleep.
Oh yeah, you were great and so on. But please, thank you so very, very much, and really very deep respect and love for what you're doing, and carry on and be strong. And as our, I hope perhaps the next president of the United States would put it, Cornel West, stay strong. All right.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
It's a pleasure. Take care.
You too.
Thank you very much. And thank you so very, very much for watching us here on The Radical Imagination. And this is Jim Fredos. We'll see you again next week. And we will have Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on next week. And we hope to have, as I said, mentioned Cornel West on in some future weeks, sooner than later. Thank you again so very much.